Hello world, hello Facebook, hello all those watching this on listenvisionlive.com. It's the Nitty Gritty Show. It's your boy Jay DeCosta.
It's your girl Katniss.
And together we are the Nitty Gritty.
It's Tim Wise. You're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Everybody, this is Stevie Powell. You're now watching the Nitty Gritty Show. Check it out.
And so I'm DeCosta and you need to watch the Nitty Gritty Show.
My name is Sherman Moss, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
That's the Grant Thompson, aka G. Ainsworth, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
I'm Anthony White, and this is the Nitty Gritty Show.
Yeah. Bam, it's Jay Thompson. You're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
You are watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
My name is Jay Grant Thompson, and guess what? You're in tune to the Nitty Gritty Show.
I'm Will Jawando, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
And my name is Mitch Holmes, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
My name is Peter DeCosta and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
This is Pastor Rob, and you're on the Nitty Gritty Show.
I'm Ray Pittman, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Hey, this is Joni Ford of Ford Wilderness, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Benny Black, and you are watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
It's time for the Nitty Gritty. Conversations get real live. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. The revolution's not televised. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. Reaching out to your conscious mind. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. More than talking and taking action. It's time for the Nitty.
Hello world, what's going on Facebook? Everybody catching us live on listenvisionlive.com. It's your boy Jay DeCosta.
And it is your girl Katniss.
And together we are the Nitty
Gritty.
Gritty. Look, excited about the show today. I know I always say that. I'm always excited about the show, but I really am excited about the show today. We have Dr. Leslie Hinkson on the show today.
Great
We're gonna
to
be
here.
we're gonna be talking about institutionalized racism in medicine. And this is a very broad topic. You know, a lot of times when you hear it, it's like, okay, so what do you mean? Where are you going with that? But we're going to go a lot of places with it. And we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about Dr. Hinkson first. Dr. Hinkson is an assistant professor of sociology at Georgetown University. Her research explores the role and meaning of race across institutional context and its effect on educational, employment, and health outcomes. A graduate of the doctoral program in sociology in Princeton University, she subsequently completed a postdoctoral fellowship with the Robert Wood Johnson Health University. Got my words mixed up. Robert Johnson Wood Health Policy Research Fellows at University of Michigan, right? Also had a huge role in health and medical related work, focuses on race-based decision-making by physicians and the role race-based medicine plays within our broader system of healthcare delivery. Her edited volume, Living in the Red Debt, The American Healthcare System, the race-based medicine explores the relationship between race-based medical interventions and debt as a means of the revealing of unintended negative health and sociological consequences of the former. Her social networks of academic achievement and the levels of school segregation reveal about racial attitudes in America. So you've done a lot of work. You have a crazy resume. I can't read through it all. We'll be here all day. But even before receiving your doctors at Princeton, you got your BA in political economy from Williams College, and then you got your master's in urban policy. So you have the whole gambit of what it means on the political end, but then you understand the actual health, you know, as it relates to health and all that in there. And then I know you spent some time with the United Way of New York City, and then also you were part of Teach for America.
I did Teach for America, yes.
Yeah, and you've done a lot, of stuff in Brooklyn, and then you're very active here in DC. Yep. So you've been around, and then also you're part of the you're part of the chair program for the African American Studies program at Georgetown as well, right?
Well, so I'm in the sociology department, but I do have a courtesy hire in African American Studies, and I was actually one of a group. I was one of the one of a group of faculty members who helped to make African American Studies a department at Georgetown. Because
that's a fairly new department, right?
Very new. It's less than a year old.
Yeah. So, and of course, they kind of did that in response to some things.
Yeah.
So, but nonetheless, it's here now, and we thank you for those efforts. You know, it's crazy that in 2016, 17, or 18, that schools, no matter if it's a PWI or not, are just getting an African American studies program.
Well, I mean, especially a school that's been located in a city that's been chocolate for such a long time.
And has been the black school when it comes to sports and basketball since the 80s.
Yeah.
And they've never had that department. So I'm happy to hear that, you got that to happen for us. So excited to have you on and get down to the nitty gritty of a great topic. We'll be jumping back onto that soon. But before we go there, those who watch the show know we got to give out these to hell withs. We got to throw some blessings too.
Blessings too.
But this the hell with stuff, right? I want to let me marinate for a second, all right? So first one, the Alabama's accomplice liability law, which is BS. So this came about because there's Lakeith Smith, who is now 18, but at the time of the crime was committed, was 15. He's going to serve 65 years in prison. Now catch this, listen closely. If you haven't heard, he's going to serve 65 years in prison for murder and being an accomplice to robbery. But the bulk of the time has come from the murder because a police officer in self-defense shot and killed Dante Washington, one of the accomplices of those two heists. And actually it wasn't a heist. They did a home burglary or whatever, right? And he's serving time for what a police officer did to one of his accomplices. But in Alabama, and there's a lot of states that do that, if you're involved in a crime, let's say the three of us are doing something. I could be in the car. I don't know what Kat's doing. She could rob that place and then walk out. But because you sitting in the front seat, I'm sitting behind the driver wheel, we're all an accomplice now to robbery. And if the cops were to come and shoot and kill her, they don't take responsibility for the killing of her. They say, well, you know what? You guys are going to do the time for what she did. And because we're going to associate you with that crime, you're going to get time for that as well. So now the police officers can hide behind this law saying, well, I don't got to get in trouble for killing the black man. It's not my fault. It's the fault of the people he was with. Mind you, this guy was 15. Lakeith also, in the video surveillance, he never fired any weapons. He wasn't part of any of the violent acts that went on, but he's being charged for it. And then one of the things that the media keeps bringing up is, well, he was smiling in court. Well, obviously something's not right. But we never once, like we do these white kids, ask, well, what's his psychological well-being like? What was his home life like? What's going on that he would even respond that way? We don't care because he's black. He's inherently an animal. So we just give him that.
And I also want to ask, why does he have to be tried for 65 years as an adult if the crime was taking place at 15? Shouldn't they go back and try him as a teen?
Well, all of that should have happened, but it's been in court for the last 3 years. Now, conveniently, he's 18, and they're charging him still as an adult for 2 counts of burglary and now murder.
Well, hopefully social media can help publicize the situation so that way we can get him with the right lawyers so that he won't have to serve 65 years, because I think that's really egregious and quite honestly just ridiculous. And
it just shows that we still have more work to do in Alabama, right? There was a special election.
Whatever happened to Doug? Does Doug know about this?
Exactly right.
Doug, do you know about this?
So that's why voting counts, and that's why it's not just enough to vote. I tell people this all the time. They're like, well, voting don't work. And see, this is what happened. No, it's not that voting doesn't work, but we still have work to do as citizens to hold those people that we put in office accountable. So these are the kind of laws that was like, hey, Doug, now that we're aware of this law, because maybe we were blind to it, we need you to change something about this.
Since we voted for you.
But it's not just Doug. When you're voting for your judges, when you're voting for the sheriff or the commissioner of that area, when you start voting for your state delegates and your state senators, these are the things that need to come up. These are the things you need to investigate, not by November, but by June when we start voting in the primaries, right? June. There's a whole process we need to engage in, and we're not engaged in all of the process. We vote in one place. We want to high five all the sisters, because sisters showed up at 98%, and we voted for Doug, but that's not enough. Sisters need to keep on writing Doug. Hey, we voted for you, so brother, you better act accordingly. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. And everyone, there has to be the follow-up. We got to have that if we're going to make any change.
Well, the other thing I would add is, what about criminal justice reform? I thought that we were all down for that, and then Trump won, and then now we got Sessions as our attorney general, who's...
Oh, my God.
Right? And, I think that this case in Alabama, I think it just reveals, there are a whole lot of places around this country that try 14, 15-year-olds as adults.
That is crazy to me.
And that's why we have to follow up. We have to do our part. And now ain't the time to talk trash. A hashtag ain't enough. Changing your profile pic to some kind of avatar ain't not enough. You got to go vote, and then you got to go be active. That means you can't just do it from social media, folks. You have to show up at somebody's door. You got to knock. You got to be active. You got to have boots on ground, as they would say, and be active. Be a force in reality, not in cyber.
And you got to show up at the courthouse.
Yeah, you got to show up. You got to show up and be accounted.
And I'll be the one to go there. I also think parents should get involved too. Like, you know, we just can't have our kids be out here just hanging out and doing whatever, and then we're like, well, I didn't know. Like, my mom and dad was in my business. Be in their business.
Yeah.
Be in the business.
There's so much there, and I don't want to spend too much time. We still got to get through some things, but Lord, let's do something about it.
Okay.
Second to hell with Donald Trump bombing Syria. That's the implication of that and what that's going to be. I do feel like a lot of his quick movements in politics are to cover up a lot of bad press he's getting about paying off strippers and porn stars, or having a relationship with Russia in the first place, or the business he's doing, or his son being at meetings that he was at, then he wasn't at again, and then someone saying that he was. I mean, all this stuff that's going on is like, okay, let me divert the world's attention to something that's bigger, and we're going to cause more problems by bombing Syria, which Syria did egregious things with chemical warfare, but then we're going to do that, and now we're going to be possibly at odds with Russia and China, and then that's going to embolden North Korea. So that's a whole thing there, so I got to give him a to hell with. People say that Donald Trump gets too much attention, but he's the president of the United States. Got to hold this Bama accountable. So that's that. Number 3, Starbucks in Philly, kicking out the 2 black young men. This one really pissed me off. Can we play the video real quick first? That's crazy. Thank you, Jay.
All right, have you seen this? It's the talker of the day, an arrest at a Philadelphia Starbucks that prompted all these claims of racism.
That's right, and now there's a call for a boycott of Starbucks nationwide. KCAL9's Tina Patel joins us now with more on the story and reaction. Tina?
Well, guys, Starbucks is a place where a lot of people meet up and hang out, sometimes for long periods of time. And some think the only reason these 2 men were arrested is because they were black. Some people are calling for a boycott of Starbucks after seeing this video of 2 black men being arrested at a Philadelphia location.
What did they get called for? Because there are 2 black guys sitting here meeting me?
The man in the vest says the 2 guys were waiting for him to talk about real estate investments. Witnesses say Starbucks employees called police because they hadn't ordered anything while they were waiting. Those 2 men have now hired an attorney.
These guys were doing what people do every single day. They were having a meeting, and they were undoubtedly singled out because of their race.
The Philadelphia police commissioner went on Facebook to defend his officers, saying they only responded because the men didn't listen to employees when they were asked to leave.
These officers did absolutely nothing wrong, and that they did a service that they were called to do.
Not everyone agrees.
It's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable.
It's shocking to me, actually, that there are still people out there who think that this is justified.
But some say it's hard to judge the situation by this video.
We don't know what happened in the Starbucks before the cops were called. If there was nothing going on and the cops were just called because they were black, that's awful. You know, that's racism, that's just awful. But I also don't think that we can form an opinion without being there.
Starbucks issued a statement that says, in part, we apologize to the 2 individuals and our customers and are disappointed this led to an arrest. We take these matters seriously and clearly have more work to do when it comes to how we handle incidents in our stores. Now, many of the customers we talked to say they're glad the company acknowledged what happened, and that's why they don't think a boycott is necessary. But they do say this does show that we need to have more conversations about race.
Yeah, so that one really ticked me off, and I'm going to try to run through this real quick. First of all, they sitting there chilling. Even if you look at the video, you see a white guy there on an Apple computer chilling. I ain't seen no coffee around him. And everybody knows, even here in the DMV, plenty of people just sit, chill, do homework, socialize, whatever, maybe in between meetings. Even I would go to a Starbucks and just relax, and then no one harasses me. But they were in a nice area of Philadelphia. I think they got kind of called out because they were the anomaly inside of that restaurant. And they're just sitting there minding their business. And here's the thing, to the little white girl that's like, well, if we weren't there, how can we form an opinion? Easily, based off what the store manager said about them, who was white. She said that, oh yeah, the complaint was they didn't order anything and they were just sitting there and I wanted them to leave. So if they were disruptive, she would have clearly set out they were disruptive. If they were causing a problem or smelling like weed or something, the media would have been happy to put those kind of descriptions out. But that didn't exist, so they didn't say nothing. And then it's like egg in their face because the white friend shows up because we're trying to talk about real estate opportunities. And of course, that white guy thinking because of his white privilege, nothing mean against him, but it's true. I go to Starbucks all the time and have coffee and just sit there. Surely it'll be all right, guys. You guys can meet me over there. It won't be a problem. And I'm pretty sure these black guys are probably thinking in the back of their mind, well, we already know in that part of Philly or like any other town in America, you know, they kind of look at us funny when we show up to Bethesda or when we show up in Chevy Chase or when we're in Frederick Heights. You know, they treat us a little different, right? But, you know, no, it'll be fine. You come there. Then he gets there and they're arresting him. And they're trying to figure out what's going on. And many people there were aggravated and trying to figure out, well, what's going on? And I want to know why this joker ain't fired yet. Why is that not in the news? I want to see this store manager fired because that's an issue. You don't need that kind of crap in your store. So, and let's not forget, PA did vote for Trump. So let's not act like we don't see those kind of behaviors there. We saw them in their election. So I was a little pissed off about the situation. I'm still offended by it. It's 2018, and you can't even sit in a coffee shop where everybody sits and just relax to do business like everybody does. That's the culture of Starbucks. So if people want to boycott Starbucks, you know, I'm for it. Like, whatever, do what you got to do. I'm not going to speak against it because I just don't care that much about it. Plus, I've been looking for a reason to boycott Starbucks because they're expensive. Now, moving on to some blessings. Real quick, want to give a shout out to any family suffering with loved ones that are going through the prison system, have been incarcerated, especially young men of color who have gone through things. In my personal life, I know of young men who have been, you know, arrested for different things. And I'm not trying to excuse if they did, you know, said action. But the problem is, it goes back to something I said earlier. We never look at how our young black and brown boys are doing. It's like everybody's just inherently evil. No one ever cares about their psychological state. And then even as us as a community, we never say, hey, so-and-so, are you okay? And some of these boys have dealt with great things with their fathers. Some of them have been molested. Some of them have, you know, been next to molestation in their homes. And, you know, they deal with all this trauma, and then a crime happens. And it's not just as simple as they needed more discipline. Sometimes it's like they needed treatment. They needed help. They needed to have a conversation sometimes. And we don't do that. And we talked about that just a couple of weeks back with Sidney Fenton. So just wanted to give a blessings to that. We're praying for you guys. We're standing with you. Yeah, people have to be accountable to the things they do. I'm not taking that away. But I think we could do a better job of getting before this by just really asking people, how are you? And really having hard conversations that we don't want to have, right? So just a thought there. And then also, this is a cool one. Shout out to everybody crossing the burning sands this past weekend. Want to shout out Alexandria Smith, who just crossed Delta at Georgetown University. We went to that probate, so that was cool. So blessings to all of you who've made your way and had your journey. Now we want to get down to the nitty gritty because we've wasted enough time. I won't say we wasted time, but we spent a lot of time there, more so than normal. We want to talk about this institutionalized racism in medicine. We have a quick video we're going to play, and then we're going to get down to it. Jay, can you run that video for me, sir?
And then, of course, there was James Marion Sims, whose reputation is etched in history and on that statue in Central Park. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims began performing experimental surgeries on a 17-year-old slave named Anarcha. He eventually performed 30 operations on Anarcha and more surgeries on about 11 other female slaves. When his male colleagues could no longer bear to assist him in inflicting pain on the women, the slaves took turns restraining one another. Yet paintings depicting Sims, Anarcha, and other slave women presented a subdued version of his experiments. Even though anesthesia was introduced in 1846, Sims chose not to use it for his experimentation with slaves. His practices echoed one of the most prevalent and dangerous beliefs in medicine at the time, that Black people did not feel pain or anxiety. This book from 1851, titled The Natural History of Human Species, claimed the American dark races bear with indifference tortures insupportable to a white man. Central Park in Manhattan. There's a bronze statue of a doctor named James Marion Sims, whose brilliant achievement carried the fame of American surgery throughout the entire world. He's the guy who created the vaginal speculum, an instrument gynecologists use for examination. He pioneered the surgical repair for fistula, a complication from childbirth, and became known as the father of modern gynecology. But that brilliant achievement was the result of a series of excruciating experimental surgeries that he conducted on enslaved women. In a lot of ways.
And that was a video by Vox. It's really interesting. I think I want to post it to the page because I want people to see that whole. It's like a small documentary, but it talks about some of the evil practices that were done in medicine. But these people are now celebrated in medicine for the work that they did. But the cost was our black women and or our black children suffering in these experiments on humans. You know, Peter goes out here and talk about dogs and using monkeys all day, but then when it comes to an actual black person who's been dehumanized, and that's why I don't think they recognize the struggle the same way. They kind of glance over it. So that's where we turn to you. And I think before we even get started, what even got you into this course of study? Because you have a varied careers. Like, you came in one place and now you're finishing in another. Mm-hmm. And even off air we were talking about just your journey through corporate America and now at this place.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have to say that when I was in college, I didn't know what sociology was. Mm-hmm. Just to be truthful, I was a political economy major. And I think I think the thing that turned it for me was when I read the bell curve, right? So Hinkson and Murray's study of, the link between intelligence and genetics, right? Mm-hmm. First they look at class, and their whole argument is basically that America's become this, not just this meritocracy, but, this society in which, those of us who have, great genetic material, as it relates to IQ, those are the ones who increasingly are becoming the upper classes, and then everyone else is being left behind, right? And it's all because of genes. So first they look at class and they say, well, if you're poor in America, it's because you have faulty genes, right? And this leads to you not just, not getting good grades in school, but not going to college, engaging in crime, having children out of wedlock, wow, et cetera, right? And then they turn to race. And then they try to make the same argument along racial lines, looking primarily at blacks. And mm-hmm. And I remember reading this and I was like, people still think like this, mm-hmm. right? This book was written in 1994. It was mm-hmm. published in 1994 by these two supposed, sort of, academic giants at Harvard, right? And I was like, even I can read this, right? And I can go through the statistics in the end, and I can show you right. what mm-hmm. is wrong with this argument. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe millions of copies of this book have been sold worldwide. And so that got me thinking, and I was like, what other areas in life is race so deeply entrenched, right? That we can have people who should know better creating this kind of research, putting it out there, and having millions of people say, you know what, we thought that all along, right? So that's basically how I got into it. So I started wow. I started out thinking about education, right? And then in terms of medicine, I thought to myself, what is the one area in society in which we are still allowed to say, right, loud and proud, oh yeah, we think that race is biological and we will treat it accordingly. Everywhere else, people have been like, even if they don't believe it, race is a social construction. Race is not real, right? In medicine, we still treat race like it's biological truth.
Now, one thing that's always happened in the black community is that we have historically not been trusting of doctors in hospitals. We have our grandparents like, I'm not going to the doctor for that. I'll just eat a little bit of this, drink a little bit of that, a little apple cider with the mother, and then it's
exactly, or ginger ale.
Yeah.
It dry.
Oh, your stomach hurt? Ginger ale.
Everything.
Yeah. Some ginger root with some tea, you'll be fine, right? So, do you think it's because of this institutionalized racism that has begun, or is that where that stems from?
I think that there are a number of reasons, right? I think part of it is that for a very long time, if you want to talk about institutionalized racism, for a very long time, medicine was segregated, right? And segregated medicine, the separate but equal thing is nothing but just separate, right? And so for a very long time, you knew that, if you were black in America, and I'm not just talking in the South, if you were black in America and you needed a doctor, you need to go to hospital, it's one thing if you had black doctors in your community that you trusted, right? But if you had to go to the hospital, you knew that you could only go to the segregated hospital, the hospital that only served blacks, and those hospitals were usually under-resourced, underfunded, et cetera. That's number one. Number two, there's also that history of experimentation, and so it's kind of this perfect storm of, number one, we don't have much access to care. Number two, care is expensive, right? Even at the under-resourced hospital. Number three, there's this history of mistreatment in medicine of black bodies, right? So why would I put myself out there, right?
Yeah, and I have a question too. I don't know if this is true, but do you think it also could have been because we didn't see ourselves reflected in physicians as much? Of course there are black doctors, but it seems or appears that there's definitely more people who are non-black as MDs as there are MDs. Like when I see people graduating from medical school, I only see like literally a handful of black folks. Do you think that's a possibility as well?
What's a possibility? There are tons of studies. There are tons of studies out there that actually show that that patients. That patient-doctor concordance, right, in terms of race, also in terms of gender many times, like actually makes patients trust their doctors more, right? And so if you feel as though, and on the other side, there's even more research that shows, well, part of it might be because white doctors tend to misunderstand their black patients, right? So number one, they tend to not spend as much time with black patients as they do with the white patients. They tend to not talk to them or explain things to them as much.
Yep.
And they also tend to assume certain things about their black patients that they wouldn't automatically assume about their white patients. Like, for example, they tend to underestimate the level of education of their black patients.
Wow.
Number one. Another thing that they also tend to do is they also tend to assume that their black patients will be less likely to follow their treatment regimens, right? And so as a result of that, they tend to try and give black patients the most simplified care regimens possible because they assume that they will not comply.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's crazy because you see it all the time. Even being in the VA, right? I'm a veteran, and when I go there, there's certain attitudes I have. Like if I'm dealing with a white doctor, there's a way that they deal with cholesterol and conversations around that. They just assume. And then, you're like, well, no, I run. So, no, that's not the case. And then when they finally take, your vitals, they're like, oh, wow, your blood pressure is really good. But they just assume it's going to be bad. They're just going to assume, like, oh, well, you all just consume a bunch of salt and sugar. So I expect to see more of the same. You're a decent sized guy, so I know what I'm going to get. And then when you don't get that, it's like, well, I just assumed.
Well, that's interesting because the VA is usually the gold standard for us, right? So people who basically do this the kind of research and in looking at racial disparities, for example, they tend to look at the VA because that's generally where you tend to find lower levels of health disparities, right? Than in the civilian population. So.
But it still exists. I even see it there. So I know that I can only imagine how much worse it is outside of those walls, right? Something else that that comes up too, in the video they talk about experimentation, and I think that's something that maybe our grandparents and great grandparents are more aware to or thoughtful of, considering what their generations had passed down to them. I think it somewhat got lost to ours, but people forget about the Tuskegee experiments. They forget about people like Henrietta Lacks and harvesting their organs, and that. Even today, the harvesting of black organs is still a big thing on the black market. You go into the deep web, and when they're selling organs illegally, they're typically harvesting those from people of color because of the richness of the organs that they found in studies. How do we start educating people on that to make it? Because when people bring it up now, it seems like an urban myth or it comes off like a conspiracy theory, but it's very much based in fact. So, how do we explain that or like break that bridge to make sure that it's, hey, this is reality. Make it a reality check.
Well, that's interesting because I haven't read anything about the dark web or about harvesting of organs or anything like that. But if that is in fact happening, that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about medicine and race, because historically, sort of everything we know, like so many of the medical advancements we've been able to make in this country has been because of experimentation on live black bodies or black cadavers, right? Which is interesting given that black people were supposedly so different, right, than white folks, right? So if our bodies, right, if our biology and our anatomy are so incredibly different, right, how is it you've been able to build an entire system of medicine, right,
based off that.
In order to treat white bodies based off of the study of black bodies, right? So that's number one. And number two, also, if in fact we see this harvesting of organs going on, right, primarily among people of color, that also seems to fly in the face of, black, physiological inferiority, right? Would you want a black liver in your body or a black kidney in your body, given how hypertensive black folk are, right? How unhealthy black folk are, right? So, I mean, I think that this discussion, and especially when we think about the history of medicine in America, I think it reveals a lot of the sort of not just hypocrisy, but also just kind of just like the kind of lies, right? That I think institutions like medicine have actually sold to the American public in order to make profits, right? And in order to make history.
And I want to stay right there. So when they do these research projects, who are they actually researching? Because to me, a lot of times when you read about breast cancer, hypertension, high blood pressure, it always seems like it's like black people are more than likely or 5 times more likely. Are they just sampling a very small sample size to be able to, I guess, prove their bias or their inherent bias possibly?
Well, so it depends on the kind of study, right? Okay. So there are epidemiological studies, right, where you tend to actually, the gold standard would be to try and get a nationally representative sample. So what you do is you would actually get information from people around the country. So it's basically small sample sizes from different parts of the country, right? That then tells you, okay, fine, right? We've found that African Americans are X% more likely to have hypertension before the age of 60 than whites are, right? The devil's in the details, though, right? Because you need to be able to. So, what does that 5 times more likely mean, right? Does that mean that 2% of whites have it, so that means 10% of African Americans have it? If so, is that there's a disparity, but is it a huge disparity, number one? And number two, is it statistically significant, right? So a lot of it depends on how large your sample size is and how people are manipulating the data. So there are those kinds of studies. And then there are clinical trials, right? So you might have clinical trials where what you need to do is you need to get people to volunteer to be in these trials, right? And so again, hypertension, just simply because that's a disorder that I know the most about, you say, okay, fine, we want to see how responsive people are to this hypertensive drug, this drug to help control your high blood pressure, right? So number one, it is kind of difficult to get African Americans to enroll in these kinds of trials, right?
Okay.
Partly because of this lack of trust, right? And what's really interesting, and in that edited volume that you mentioned at the beginning, which is actually called Subprime Health, I have a chapter with Ruha Benjamin, who's a professor at Princeton, that speaks to this trust, and the way in which people who are trying to design these trials try and spin it is there's something wrong with black people. Black people lack trust, right? Rather than thinking, you know what, black people are actually quite rational given the history of medicine and experimentation in this country. So what then do we need to do in order to build that trust, right? You know, so it's not that black folk lack trust. It's that the institution of medicine and biomedicine more broadly actually lacks trustworthiness, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I was going to even say, I'm also wondering, we say it's in the details, how much do they look at SES status, socioeconomic status? Because I'm pretty sure there's probably a correlation to anybody of any color, whether you're white or black, who live in poverty. You're probably not going to be as healthy as someone that has access to healthier options, right?
So that's one of the things in medical research and even in epidemiology. Socioeconomic status measures they're actually very, very poorly constructed. They have very bad measures, right? So they can, you know, back in the day, we use things like, well, do you have health insurance, right? Are you employed? And you'd even use household income, right? But, you know, household income for how many people in your household, right? And we have known for a long time that wealth is actually a better indicator than household income is, right? So, and we know there are huge gaps in wealth, right, between blacks and whites, right?
Huge.
So income itself. So without very good SES measures, even when we do control, I don't think we're actually really, really getting at, you know, what is it? And then we also know that even when we do have good measures of socioeconomic status, you know, where people live, right, is actually a powerful determinant of how healthy they are. And given that we still have, like, you know, pretty significant residential segregation, right? Not just in cities, but increasingly in suburbs, right? As cities are being gentrified, right? And middle-class black folk are having to leave cities to go to the suburbs. And, you know, and definitely there's residential segregation in rural areas too, right? And what we tend to see is those areas that are heavily black are the ones where we see concentrations of environmental pollutants. We see lower levels of access to healthy food, right? We see less access to open spaces where you can exercise, right? And then, you know, we're also more likely to be under heightened police surveillance, which, you know, that would raise my blood pressure. So
true, or I wouldn't want to be out and about because at any given point in time I may be racially profiled.
That's right.
I do have another question, and
Go ahead.
Okay, so I've heard and read that back in the day when we were segregated, they found that black children actually did learn really well under the tutelage or learning of, you know, black people and kind of this togetherness. Even when you look at HBCUs and support that black students have, there is definitely a different aura or confidence you have as opposed to a PWI when you're just one person in the classroom. I'm wondering, is there any correlation to that with black doctors back in the day when we were segregated? Are there studies that prove that perhaps at that point in time we were taking our health, I'm not going to say more serious, but that there was a more trust level because you were meeting with black physicians? I don't know if there are any studies like that to prove.
I haven't seen any sort of historical studies, you know, that go back and see that. But I mean, I would assume, you know, I mean, so there are three things that I think are really important in the medical encounter, right? The first is you need to trust your doctor. Right. Number two, your doctor has to be a good doctor, right? And number three, that doctor has to value you as a human being, right? And so that doctor has to actually care whether or not you thrive under his or her care. Your doctor doesn't have to like you, right? Your doctor doesn't have to say, oh, I'd love to have a beer with him or her at some point, right? You know, or be your best friend. Your doctor just needs to see you as a human being, right? And see you as an individual, right? And when that doesn't happen, you're not going to get very good care. And you know, we might assume that back in the day when there were black doctors who could only practice in black communities, right, and also could only live in black communities, right, that, you know, that sort of level of, okay, linked fate, we're all in this together, right? Plus I know you, right? I take care of you, I take care of your kids, I take care of your mom and your dad, right? And this part of being part of a community, like I would assume, and I think we still see that in small towns today, right? You know, even if you might not have the best medical equipment, right? You know, one of the most important things in the medical encounter, it's not the best MRI machine, it's a doctor who listens to you.
And are there things? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and are there things that you can indicators that would show that this doctor cares for me? Like, if I'm going to a doctor, how do I know that this person is a good doctor or that they care for me as a Black person? Are there things that I should look out for potentially?
Well, so, I mean, I always count on my spidey senses.
Okay.
And I mean, it's like when they start to tingle, then I'm like, okay, right? We may not all have like superhero spidey sense, right? You know, when you go to the doctor, especially when you're going to a doctor for the first time, like the first time you meet a doctor is that time for the doctor to get at everything, right? I want to know your family history. I want to know who you are. I want to know, you know, as much about you as possible. If your doctor isn't taking the time to ask about your family history and also ask questions about that family history as opposed to just reading whatever form that you filled out.
Interesting.
If you have a doctor who doesn't, simply seems like they're, you know, filling out a checklist and not asking you questions, if your doctor doesn't make eye contact with you, those are the kinds of things. And if you then have questions for your doctor and your doctor doesn't take the time to answer your questions, like those are all, you know what, in that initial visit, you are, you know, your doctor is auditioning for you, right? Not the other way around, right? And I think that, you know, like people in our community in particular need to be more emboldened and understand that we're the customer. Like we're the customer. And it's hard. It's hard with doctors because there's this problem of information asymmetry, right? We're like, oh, they are so educated. They know all of these things. I give them a checklist of things and all of a sudden they can magically come up with a diagnosis, right? That's not the way it works. I mean, doctors are not superheroes, right? They're human beings as well. So that initial visit, you are auditioning. Your doctor should be auditioning for you. And if that doesn't happen, then you need to say, all right, you need to go to the next one.
Yeah, and you know, even with that though, I think even as I've been listening to the conversation, you know, I guess the thing that still concerns me is that everything is so muddled as far as the racist background to medicine as to how it leads now. Like I've seen studies where they say that we're less likely, even now today, our children or us, if we go to a hospital and we're complaining about pain, their ability to treat our pain or things we're going with is less likely than a white person. And we know that stems from racism or slavery when they wanted to justify the beating of slaves, the mistreatment of slaves. So they came out and saying, oh no, you know, slaves, and I think they even said this in the video, slaves actually are more susceptible to pain. So it's all right. Like they don't feel pain the same way. Like, yeah, if you beat them with a whip, they're very resilient people. They'll be fine. You know, if you just hit a white man like that, oh good God, you know, that's horrible. You're going to leave these lacerations and everything. But black people, it's a little different. So it's okay. And even now, even though studies have proven that we're supposed to be one human race and all of that, it's still very muddled in a very racist background because at the end of the day, they're still praising these guys like Sims for writing the book on gynecology. So it's like it's hard to dismiss, I guess, the work he learned from the racist agenda that was there. So then they kind of take it all instead of breaking apart what it is, and they take it on as gospel. And we see it in a lot of things, like even in the military, there's a lot of jobs that black men who would aspire to do different various jobs had a hard time getting because they would use those excuses saying, well, the black man is not able to withstand that. Like the reason why you don't see many black pilots, because there were studies out there that said, oh, well, black men just can't handle altitude the same way that white people do. You know, which, you know, it's false. But it's crazy because at the same time, they want us playing all their sports. They want us doing all these different things. I think movies like Get Out actually highlighted how white people have been jealous of a long time of our physical ability and acumen. I mean, you look at what Serena Williams has done in tennis and all of that, but yet and still, when it's time for us to be treated, when we go to the hospital, they divert back to these old racist agendas when it's time to treat us. Now our organs are inferior. Now this, but yet and still every day we see black specimens paraded across the TV screen for our amusement. So when it's time to be a Mandingo warrior, oh yeah, specialized, blah, 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 blah. But God forbid if I'm sick and I need help, oh yeah, back to being inferior again, because we don't really want to spend the money to treat you.
Well, so I think in terms of that pain example, I think is a great example, right? In that, number one, it brings you back to, sort of the history of, the history of race and racism in this country, especially as it relates to black bodies, right? And sort of the kind of mythology and sort of where that mythology comes from. So yeah, I mean, I would say, like, from the 1970s on, I feel like every 10 to 12 years, another study comes out that says, oh my goodness, yet again, emergency rooms are undertreating the pain of black patients, right? And, more recently, Latinos have been included in there. Yep, Latinos are also undertreated, right? But blacks are severely undertreated for pain. And I think the last study that came out, I want to say was 2 years ago. And I remember listening to the lead researchers on that story, and basically they said, yeah, even today you will ask doctors and you will ask them, so well, what is your rationale? And some of them will say, well, black people have thicker skin. Like, I mean, literally, they believe that black people have thicker skin than other kinds of people. And so that's why their pain is lesser. There's that. One of the things that I did hear, and in that same interview, and I thought it was really interesting, is one of the commentators said, well, maybe for one of the first times in the history of the United States, racial discrimination actually did African Americans affect, because they haven't been as affected by the opioid crisis as white people have, right? What? Yeah, because, so here's the thing. So number one,
oh my gosh.
So number one, it's like, okay, they don't feel as much pain. But number two, the other thing is there's also this stereotype that black people who come to emergency rooms for pain management, they think you're coming there because you're just drug seeking, right? Because, black folk are all drug addicts, right? So these are reasons why their pain is undertreated. Whereas with the whole pain revolution that we saw coming out in medicine in the 80s and the 90s, they were like just giving out opioid scripts, right? Writing opioid scripts for white patients, right? And as a result, that among a few more unfortunate events, we have the quote unquote opioid crisis, exploding across America, right? That seems to be disproportionately affecting white Americans. But, one of the things that I find interesting is there are plenty of black and brown opioid heroin addicts, right, across America. They're just not the poster child, right? Unlike when we had the crack cocaine epidemic.
Talk about
right?
it.
And black folk, right? That was the image of crack addiction, even though there were plenty of white crack addicts around the country.
Yeah. But even in the terminology they use, so even with crack, they gave it the slang name. They never called it medically what it was. That's a form of opioid and all that, but they don't call it that. They'll say, well, that's crack. They use the street name, but they don't say that we have a meth epidemic in America. We have an opioid epidemic in America. So therefore, even just the language suggests that this problem is medically sound, and it causes a different kind of attention. It's not about being poor or in the hood. No, this is something that medicine and doctors need to get straight to take care of our young meaning white kids when they say it. And then we were just actually downtown, and I made a comment about Daniel Webster and I call him a racist bastard when I pass by. But he had the dictionary, but even if you look at words in the dictionary and the connotation associated with like black or white or anything dealing with like color, like brown, and the descriptions they use like mud, dirty, things like that. But when it's white, it's pure. But the truth is, scientifically, white is the reflection of color, and that's why they reflect all of us when they mix their babies with us, right? But then black is the absorption of color. If you think about what a black hole is scientifically, it's absorbing color, and that's why black is beautiful, because actually literally all color is represented in black, and that's why everything that black touches, it can't help but be seen because it absorbs it all. But it's the way we use words and the way that we strategize things, it makes a difference in legislation. And I think it's important that we call these things out what they are, because it's like, no, you need to take care of people suffering with crack the same way you take care of people suffering with the use of meth or the drugs you prescribed them in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I think there are a few things going on. So I think number one, you're right, there is definitely the whole race component, right? Mm-hmm. Number two, one of the things that medical professionals will tell you is that, we've just gotten better at understanding that that addiction is a disease and not something that should be criminalized, right?
They only change it when it affects white people, though.
So when the whole war on drugs, they were really literally arresting people just for having it. They weren't selling it, but they were using it.
Just saying. And then also, I mean, if you also think about it, you talked about meth and methamphetamines, right? At that point, when meth was a big thing in the white community, that was affecting, I think, primarily, sort of like lower income, rural whites, right?
They don't care about them.
What I'm saying is now with the opioid crisis, when so many of its victims are affluent, right, middle class, suburban whites, right? I mean, that's huge. And also, there's also the case that I think the medical establishment is also having this mea culpa moment where they're like, well, we were kind of prescribing you this stuff and we didn't realize that it was addictive, even though we probably should have known it was addictive, right? So I think all of those things combined, we got race, we got class, right? And we also have, doctors basically acting as drug dealers, right? For 2 decades before they were like, oops. So
because there's a lot of payoffs for that. And I have one more question because we're getting down to the end. So I want to ask one more question to you before we start getting like closing remarks. But I think a lot of times people don't realize, even with medicine and diagnosis, is how we've treated weed as a class 1 drug, and yet cocaine and stuff is still a class 2. Even though, we've seen how weed, and I'm not, I've never smoked it or whatever, but we've seen how it's been used effectively in medicine to treat certain things, PTSD, various cancers and all of that. But yet and still, people are still facing more jail time for the possession or selling of weed than they are for cocaine. But we know people with money can buy cocaine. Broke folks got to buy weed. That's a different kind of high. And there's a dollar amount associated to it. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that is not just a civil or justice issue. That is still a medical issue, because there's doctors telling these politicians that, we classify it based off that because of what the studies say, but the studies are muddled in racism.
Well, I mean, one of the things I would say, I think, I don't know, I'm thinking that we're going to see some movement on this. I think that there are some, I think, really savvy guys in the NFL, right, who have been pushing on this, who've been saying, look, you know what, we're not taking opioids for our pain anymore, right? We are smoking weed, right? Or we're ingesting weed, right? And it is allowing us to take care of our pain and allow us to get on that field and do what we need to do without the negative side effects of opioids, right? And so they're out there pushing, right, to say, hey, we need to get rid of opioids, right? And we need to be looking more at marijuana and more medical marijuana for pain relief. Pain is real, right? But we need to be treating pain in a way that doesn't turn people into addicts.
Yeah.
And what I hope is that if they do push the miracle marijuana thing, I hope that they actually allow Black folks to benefit financially from it.
Well, that's another thing, right? So I think in most places where you actually see, okay, fine, we have dispensaries, whether it's for medical marijuana or whether it's, for recreational marijuana. I just kind of happened upon one in Aspen. I wasn't looking for one, and it was amazing. It was I've never seen anything like this before, right? But I can tell you, and I know that there's actually been a debate here in DC, right? What's been going on in DC, because you can only hand out but so many licenses to open these things, right? People were crying racism, what was this, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when they were saying, how come this is our neighborhood, but none of us were given licenses to actually run a dispensary here in DC. So,
and that's going on in Maryland right now, but we're like literally out of time. But I want people to be able to follow up with you because you've done a lot of interesting work. You're actually working on some new work. I think that's going to be interesting. Where can our listeners find you if they want to get more information? Plus, we're going to have you back on again because there's still a litany of things that we didn't talk about yet, and we're going to have to talk about it at some point. So we want to have you back. But where can our listeners find you?
Sure. You can send me an email at lrh27@georgetown.edu. I'm also co-host of 2 different podcasts. One is the annexpodcast.com and the other is the B-side. And you can find both of those at sociocast.org. So yeah, they're podcasts for sociologists, but I think everybody can get something out of it. So
that's dope. Yeah. So definitely, we hope our listeners will go and tune in there and check those out. Kat, can you tell them where they can find the Nitty Gritty Show?
Absolutely, you guys can follow the Nitty Gritty Show on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at the Nitty Gritty Show.
Once again, Dr. Hinkson, thank you for coming out and having this conversation with us. This was great. I think a lot of people don't realize how relevant this conversation still is. A lot of times people think like this was an old conversation that ended maybe with like the Tuskegee experiments or maybe like with eugenics, but is that still relevant now? I don't think people realize these are things that are still going on now in our current culture and still need to be addressed. So thank you for having this conversation with us. But then also I want to remind our listeners, the Nitty Gritty Show, we're very active in the DMV, been very active with a lot of politicians and events. If you have an event going on in the area and you want us to come out, or maybe you're in like a neighboring city like Philly or something like that, and we'll show up to a Starbucks and we're going to sit there and chill and I won't order nothing. Dare them to kick me out, right? We'll come out and support your event. Or you could come kick it with us April 29th. We're going to be celebrating a year on air. Today's our 50th episode. What? So make sure you come through April 29th. We have a live tape. It won't be a typical show, but you come, have a drink with us, maybe eat some cake. Maybe we'll have a healthy option like some strawberries or something. But we don't get down to the nitty gritty. So we just happy to be here. But once again, thank you for coming on. We about to be out. It's your boy Jay DeCosta.
And it is your girl Katniss.
Together we are the Nitty Gritty. Look, another great show, Dr. Hinkson. Once again, thank you for coming on. And you guys know you'll be able to catch this show on Facebook or YouTube when we out. Look, y'all be blessed and y'all be safe out there. And go sit at a Starbucks and not order a darn thing. Dare them to kick you out.